It's so lovely to see you all. It would obviously, I personally would love to all be in person more, but the fact that we are all joined through the incredible thing that is the internet is in itself a miracle. So my name is Nessie, and I'm director of the Global Environments Network. And the Global Environments Network, which hereto we refer to as GEN. If you keep hearing the word GEN, it means the Global Environments Network. And that is our organisation, which was set up in 2011. And our mission is to support a network of people dedicated to working for ecological and social justice. So we have a membership of over about 500 people, and we represent about 85 different countries. So if you'd like to find out more about GEN, please visit our website, get in touch. We have newsletters, we have lots of different opportunities and events and trainings and workshops over the next year or two. We have an ongoing program of work, so get in touch if you'd like to find out more. So what is the GEN in Conversation series? We decided, rather than having lots of formal panel discussions and debates, our kind of style again is to be very informal, and also to create a sense of almost like a kind of peer-to-peer classroom. So we came up with the In Conversation series, which we've been doing since June, which I think some of you may have already been on. We had an event on colonization, another one on food. And so today, why did we choose an event of communicating in times of polarity? I mean, it's pretty apt, considering that today, I'm sure everyone knows, unless anyone's living under a rock, is the US elections, which is pretty monumental. And I think it's safe to say a time of great polarity in terms of political messaging. Marie Curie said, nothing in life should be feared, it should only be understood. And I feel that's something that's incredibly important. I'm deeply passionate about that statement, about that sentiment. And I think that the further we become entrenched in polarizing narratives, the deeper we go down the rabbit hole of separation and conflict. So inspired by principles around nonviolent communication, the way of counsel, active listening, I had this feeling that it was really important to have a conversation around communicating, and particularly for interacting in ways that help us not only to understand one another, but to also to have tools for creating dialogue, even with individuals and groups that we don't agree with, which I feel is probably happening more than ever. And I think right now, these extreme, either political narratives or personal narratives seem sometimes to be increasing. You're either an adamant vegan, or you're a meat eater and a carnivore. You're either a lefty or you're righty. You're either a Trump supporter or Biden. It feels like these polarizing narratives aren't really serving anything. And if anything, I'd say they're upholding these entrenched levels of divisiveness. So I've always been a big believer, if you get amazing people together and you have an initial seed of an idea, then amazing things happen. And putting together Sandhya and Irina with the amazing work of Corinne and Marina, who are part of GEN, we've created this event, which we're really excited to share with you today. So just to give you a bit of an idea of how long we're going to go on for and what will include, before I hand over to our wonderful speakers. So we'll go on until 6 p.m. UK time, which is just under 2 hours from now. And it will be a combination of Sandhya and Irina sharing their experiences and thoughts around what polarization is and how it plays out in our daily lives, politically and personally. And then we'll move into an exploration of polarity in an embodied way, and then we'll come together in group work. Just to name at this point, nothing is obligatory. We want everyone to feel comfortable. We want everyone to feel like you want to be here, and no one's going to be put on the spot, other than us three actually, because we're being spotlighted. But other than that, no one will be. Before I hand over to our speakers, a couple of technical points, and Corinne, please do jump in if I miss anything. So we do have the chat function. And I'm sure many of you now, if not all of you, who've been on Zoom. The chat function is useful for sharing resources, but it can be really distracting. So particularly when something really emotive comes up, if you feel a need to share something, absolutely fine. But our request is that it doesn't become a separate conversation where there's this like bing, 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 bing chat going off, because it can be really distracting. And it can be quite triggering as well if people are particularly making bold statements. Nothing wrong with a bit of triggering, but better to have it in a kind of shared container that is our collective and is our group. So please use the chat, but not to the point where it kind of takes over. So we are recording this event and it will be circulated. For the breakout rooms, it won't be recorded for the sake of privacy and a sense that people can feel an openness to share. That's why we're not recording the breakout groups, but the public events like this, it will be recorded and that will be shared. Another invitation is to, if you can, to keep your video on. Even if you're cooking, you're out on a run, you're cleaning out your hamster cage, you're doing some Tai Chi, absolutely fine. We are really into multitasking, but it's just quite nice sometimes if you have the internet connection and if you feel comfortable. Just to feel that you're not talking to a vacuum, particularly for our speakers, at least if some of us can keep the video on, because it can feel a bit strange and you've just got these blacked out screens and you think, who is behind that? But we also totally recognise some people may wish to remain anonymous, some people may not wish to be on the video, and also internet connection, of course, is a factor. So we do really recognise that. A couple of other things, if you wish to, please give yourself a name, which I think everyone has done. You know, sometimes it's like Jenny's iPad and you're like, who's Jenny's iPad? Nice to actually have someone's name there. And if you want to put your preferred pronoun, and if you want to, and the country you're in, if you'd like to, just because it's nice to see where everyone's from. We are a global network, and so most of the time we have many different countries on the call, and it's always fun to see who's on. Can I ask everyone now, it's going to be a bit mad and chaotic, but that's fun, to just unmute yourself and say hello in your preferred language. So on 3, I'll do 1, 2, 3, and on 3, please unmute and say hello in whatever language you feel like saying hello in. Just make some noise, basically. And then after that, we'll go back to unmuting. So 1, 2, 3.
Merhaba.
Shalom.
Beautiful.
Great. That didn't completely crash the system. I'm sure it doesn't crash the system. It's far too technological for that. Oh, I've been spotlighted. So now if I can ask everyone to go back to being muted, that would be brilliant, just so we don't hear you cleaning out your hamster cages in the background. So yeah, welcome everyone. It's a delight to see you all. If you do have anything technical, or if anything's come up for you that you don't want to share in the whole group, please feel free to drop either me or Corinne a message. So Corinne, you should all be able to see Corinne's waving now. So if you need to drop us a message, you go into chat and then you click on the bottom where it says to, you click on the person you want to send the message to. So I'm Nessie or Corinne, either of us two, if anything comes up, that would be fantastic. Corinne, before we launch in, have I missed anything technical?
No, I think you covered everything. Thanks, Nessie.
Great. Okay. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our wonderful speakers. Sandhya, tell me a little bit about your personal journey and how you got to where you are now.
Thank you, Nessie. Thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Yeah, really welcoming each and every one of you. Just had a quick scan through, so thank you for joining us today. Yeah, I didn't realize that I could cook my dinner and clean my hamster cage out while I was doing this. Nessie didn't actually tell me that, but how did I get here? I think I'd like to start with my roots of my upbringing. So I was born in London and I grew up in a Gujarati household, so Northwest Indian household, where one of my parents always spoke Gujarati and the other one spoke English. And it was a really beautiful upbringing of this kind of dual citizenship, if you like, very active in the household. And, it felt like in the house, we were very Gujarati, we were very Indian. And then outside of the house, we stepped out and we were like taking part in what we called English life. And I just wanted to share with you that every Friday in our house, we used to have English dinner, which was great. I loved it because, I don't know, yeah, I can see someone laughing. So, we'd have like pie and flans and things like that. So it's really, really lovely upbringing. And at times I absolutely rebelled against it and hated it, and then kind of came full circle background to really sort of appreciating my Indian upbringing. And within that, I was brought up as a Hindu with the religion of Hinduism. So kind of very deep, profound spiritual upbringing, prayers every day together as a family before we did anything, a sense of reverence and sacredness in the daily tasks of life. So prayers before food, or, really kind of when we went out for walks, kind of thinking about the earth as a living system. I just grew up with that. And I feel very privileged, actually. I like to reclaim that word in some ways. I feel very privileged with that sense of that upbringing. And then, and I've lived in India and I've lived in England. And again, that's been really amazing to have that sense of being rooted in both spaces and being rooted in the languages. So I speak a couple of different Indian languages. So I speak Gujarati, I speak English, obviously, and then I speak Hindi and some Urdu. So kind of having that beautiful, diverse kind of headspace around my upbringing. And then growing in London, of course, London is an incredibly multicultural space, as you all know. And so having that as an input into my growing as well really informed who I was and that exposure to life. And then later on, I went, school, and I went on to study psychology. I did psychology in education at university. I was always interested in I thought I was really interested in other people, but actually, as I kept studying it, I realized that actually I was really interested in myself, really, and how mad I was. So I really kind of recognized that I was doing this study in this process. But one of the things that I specialized in my final year with my education was around disadvantage and discrimination in terms of the education system, particularly towards Black African Caribbean children. So that was something that I got really interested in. So as time went on, I did my degree. I worked in mental health. I specialized in Asian mental health. And then I got a bit bored with that, and I ended up doing lots of practice, self-practice of meditation and Qigong and yoga, and that kind of led me to studying shiatsu, which is a bodywork that comes from Japan, and its roots are in Chinese medicine. So it's very much about energy medicine. And so I've been a practitioner for 22 years. And then I also added some Gestalt psychotherapy. So the whole is more than the sum of its parts. And we're kind of visiting that in some ways in our talk today. And I put the two together in private practice. So I do something called body psychotherapy, where we're kind of not looking at disconnection, but we're looking at connection throughout the body, mind, heart space, and how we move in life. And I guess I'm really interested in well-being, and I'm interested in thriving, and I'm interested in what stops us. What are the blocks to thriving, whether it's societal injustice or whether it's personal and internal. So kind of looking at that relationship, as I call it, between the inner and the outer landscape of ourselves and the world. And so I do that in private practice. I have worked on mental health wards. I've been working with an organization called Devon Rape Crisis. So I do trauma-informed specialist work. And then I also work a couple of days a week with a charity called the Global Centre, which basically works around local to global interconnection and justice work. And my role in that is a diversity consultant and work in schools and the community. I like working in the local geographical space. I really realized that I used to, when I was younger, have this idea that I'd love to go all over the world and do all this work, but it's become really apparent to me that I actually really like working where I am and making that change where I am. So I'm an avid tree planter as well. And, you know, I planted trees in India, and I planted trees. I used to work for a charity called Trees for Life up in Scotland, planting trees. It was a bit crazy. I used to take a week off work in the beginning and fly to Scotland to plant trees. It just did not make sense. And then I realized I couldn't do that anymore. And then we set up, a whole group of us co-creatively set up a charity where we live in Devon called More Trees. So it's playing on the word Dartmoor. And we planted lots of trees here. In fact, 2 years ago, we planted our 100,000th tree. And again, it's looking at the land in terms of not what we can get, but just what we can give and how we can heal the land space. So I think these days we call it rewilding, you know, that place where we just plant for the sake of planting and then we leave it for the biodiversity of species to take shape. So I'm quite passionate, and, you know, I've been on the bridge in London with Extinction Rebellion a few times, locally involved in there, done lots of interfaith work. So yeah, lots of different things. And what I like is bringing things together for myself in my own headspace. Yeah. And I think that might be enough. I think that might be enough about me. So Irina, I'd like to ask you the same question. Can you please tell us a little bit about your personal journey and how you got to where you are now?
Thank you, Sandhya. I feel like I learned a lot more about you from this introduction. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is really, really very special for me, especially to be in conversation about these things, not just writing about it or researching or thinking about it, but really to have community to explore these complicated processes that we're in feels really nourishing and really important. And thank you, Nessie, again, for making, and Corinne for making all this happen. I'll be brief so we have time to really dig in. What can I say? I grew up in a mixed Jewish and Armenian family in the former Soviet Union in Moscow. And my family had seen a lot of really hard times, actually, on both sides. My Armenian family, my great-grandfather was a priest who had come to Moscow to work to run the Armenian church there. And as they lived through the early Soviet times, you know, religion became sort of the enemy, and his church was closed and then destroyed, and he had to escape the country. And so there was this sort of legacy of loss and trauma. And then, of course, the Jewish side of my family, you know, had all this discrimination directed at it as it went in the former Soviet Union. So in the late 80s, there was an opening for Jewish people to leave the Soviet Union and to come to the West. And so we came to the US at that time in 1990, and I've been living in New York more or less ever since. And I think this, I mean, other than the sort of legacy of trauma, I think that my personal experience really affected me in that I felt I was the recipient of these huge social forces, you know, ethnic, political, the fight between America and the Soviet Union, and the Jews being let out was the result of that. It was a kind of, you know, part of the transition of, you know, of Soviet Union to Russia and Reagan's pressures and all of that. And so I think it's formed my way of seeing that interaction between personal and political, you know, the very private and these huge forces that kind of move our global sort of social ecology. So when I, you know, went through the education process, I was kind of exploring all the many ways of trying to get at that. And I eventually became a social psychologist studying the interaction of internal psychological process with ideologies and social forces and, you know, economic realities and global tensions, really trying to understand how do we create the realities that we then all share that feel so, you know, solid, but actually are constructed both by us as a, you know, as a community, but also by our internal processes. And so I eventually really focused on trying to understand climate change denial and applying social psychology to try to make sense of that. This was a long time ago, but it was already quite prevalent in the US, and really made very little sense from the perspective of self-preservation and, you know, trying to care for your family, your community. Why would we deny this huge threat? And so I thought it would be really interesting to look deeper into it. And what I discovered was that it's not about the science of climate change or any of these kind of more technical facets of it that we tend to focus on so much, or the truth or fact. It's really about our need to protect the social systems that we're part of, and to uphold our sense of identity and our belonging in groups, and to defend these systems that we're so deeply invested in from this threat, very endemic threat. We created the problem. There's that firehouse. And we are now, you know, unable to cope with its implications and to really see the truth that it's showing us about ourselves and our society and the ways that we need to change. So, and then I've gone on to try to apply psychology in many different settings, policy, technological development, all kinds of other ways to try to address climate problems of various kinds and potential solutions. And in all of those settings, really finding that it's hard to think about the human component of it. We'd really like to have these clear-cut solutions. We'd like to say, you know, we developed the technology, we're going to implement it. But then once it enters the social space, it becomes so much more complicated. There's all the beliefs and ideologies and resistances and polarization that comes in. So that's, you know, what we'll talk about. And it's such a central part of what I do. And lately, what I have focused on is developing my skills as a facilitator. So not only understanding what's going on in designing, you know, products or programs or communication efforts, but really knowing how to sit in the space of polarity, conflict, disagreement, difficult histories, and find connection across the divide and understand how we can keep communicating, even though there's a lot of really, you know, difficult feelings and disconnect. So yeah, I think I'll stop there just to make sure we have time to dive in, and then we'll have more time to talk about all of this.
Right. So thank you, Irina. Thank you again. Yeah, I've learned lots about you, and she's very modest because she doesn't talk about the fact that she's a doctor as well. She's got a doctorate and stuff. So thank you.
Not a medical doctor, like a medical doctor, brainy doctor. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we could start with, you know, the conversation. You know, the title is Communicating in Time of Polarities, and as Nessie said, this is an absolute time of polarization. It feels like in our world, in our society, in our communities. And you know, I've got a definition here of polarity, which is that the state of having two opposite or contradictory tendencies, opinions, or aspects. So the state of having two opposite or contradictory tendencies, opinions, or aspects. So some of the words that we might associate with polarity might be difference, separation, opposition, contradiction, duality, antagonism, conflict, dichotomy. And I just wanted to start talking about, you know, what we mean, Irina, both me and you, how we understand polarization. And I know that a lot of the conversation today, we're going to kind of keep it quite personal. We're going to try and bring in our own stories, and because that's the way that we think it's quite effective in terms of learning and listening, or certainly I find that. So maybe I could ask you, like, how do you understand polarization and polarity, and we could take it from there.
Yeah, great question. You know, I also looked up the definition, and there's the one that similar to what you read, which is more about social polarization. But for some reason, the definition that came up when I just did a quick search was from physics, and it was very informative for me, right? So one of them was the action of restricting the vibrations of a wave, especially light, wholly or partially to one direction. And I thought that's so true, because typically what happens in polarization is we go from being these diverse, multifaceted people with all kinds of mixed opinions and beliefs and relationships and histories, to being seen on one dimension along some particular issue or some set of beliefs that all kind of go together. And the rest of the fullness of the person gets lost when we see somebody on the other side of the polarity. They just become the other. Like we forget that they're also as complete of a human being as we are. We just see them as holding that position, which I think is, for me, a really big part of what polarization is all about. It's about, and also the fact that we get pushed to the extremes. So rather than occupying also this pretty kind of muddled middle, we go further and further away from each other. But I think this thing about being seen in one way, it's really kind of a first step towards dehumanization, or losing the ability to see the other person or the other group or whole country or whatever as human, as having the same moral and emotional and spiritual fullness or rights as we do.
Absolutely, yeah. I would agree with that. And I'd bring that word, in my work, I work a lot with this word diversity. And in that, you're absolutely right. What I notice in polarization, and I notice it in me, is that this sense of there's a kind of black and white approach to that person who's opposite me. They just think like this is what they are, this is who they are, and there is a narrow channeling of that, whereas actually I'm considering myself in that conversation to have an incredible diversity of, but I'm bringing in this, and this aspect and this aspect, and I forget to see that about the other person. And it's interesting because it took me to physics as well. And one of the terms of polarity in physics is the fundamental laws of nature, is namely the attraction and union of opposites, which I really like, because there was a sort of reframing of what polarity as we see. We're kind of told to look at polarity as something that's divisive constantly. But actually in physics, we look at it as something in terms of there's a space where people or things can be attracted, back into union with each other, which I thought was a really interesting space. And they talk about the middle point. And I think that's, for me, is in my practice and my work, that's the place that I'm really interested in polarity. We can do this. So for example, absolutely. I mean, you're in America today, in New York, there is this whole, I think the media everywhere in the world, create a space where people are polarized against and pitched against each other constantly. So I might just give an example of, and I'm going to ask you this too, an example of my most recent experience of being in a polarity situation, which was last Friday. And I was doing an interview for the BBC here. And, firstly, it was just badly organized because they didn't tell me who the other speakers were, and they didn't really tell me what the questions were. So I was thrown in at the deep end. But then we were talking about white privilege. So there's some government guidance right now in the UK right now where teachers are being asked not to teach anything that's anti-capitalist. So you can't take anything like Black Lives Matter or Extinction Rebellion or potentially Martin Luther King or the suffragettes, actually, because they're all considered, left-wing, radical, extremist thinking and action-based politics. So you're not allowed that. So that was the kind of nub of the piece. And they had a conservative MP, and then they had this other MP who was Asian. So it was really fascinating for me because she was Asian, yet she spoke as if we shouldn't teach white privilege in schools. She was just saying we shouldn't teach white privilege in schools because it's a divisive topic. And I was saying, and I was kind of listening to her. And what came up for me is, oh my God, she's Asian. How can she not think about power and privilege and ethnicity, because it's so relevant, right? And so I'm sitting there and I'm going, oh my God, I don't know what to do right now. And I could feel my body rising and kind of getting a little bit what I would call immobilized, because I was like, well, I don't know what to say here. Because then there's this other man who also said, well, yeah, it's really good to think about Black Lives Matter and Black children, being disadvantaged. But what about white working class children? And I was like, oh, wow. I kind of felt really trapped in the middle of these two people going, but you're not actually thinking about the topic that is being asked about, and I had to really breathe deep, do my practice, come back to my middle ground and then answer from that place. But I felt really kind of, part of me just wanted to kind of what I call roar back and go, what the hell? Why are we talking about white working class children right now when we really need to be talking about Black disadvantaged children, And yet I had to come back to my middle ground to answer kind of carefully. And with understanding, thinking, okay, who's my audience here? You know, can I push them away with my answer, or can I actually bring them into relationship where they can be listening to me? So that was my most recent, probably, you know, experience of polarity. Right? I'm just thinking about whether you could share one, you know, an experience where you were in a polarized space, Irina.
Yeah, good question. I mean, I often, because I work on climate issues, I often end up in some kind of dialogue that's quite polarized. And it's actually quite challenging for me because I often find myself among people who have let's say, some kind of a skeptical relationship to climate change, not in my work very much, but personally, and especially in the Russian Jewish community that I, you know, because I take care of my mother and for other reasons, you know, I interact with quite a number of people. And it's interesting also knowing how different I am always, you know, from people with whom I have quite close relationships and depend on, and who can be very helpful for me. So there's always kind of a background, interesting sort of the holding of polarity while being in relationship. I think a lot of us do that. But I think if I mention, if people ask me what I work on, and I give them an actual answer, the real answer, I do get a lot of people immediately wanting to talk to me about the fact that it's not real. And it's complicated on multiple levels because, first of all, just because I work in this area does not mean I'm available for that conversation at all times, or almost ever, actually. And it's a huge burden. And I think it's, you know, it's certainly gotten me some exercise in trying to set my boundaries. But what I notice is how energetic people get about it. This isn't like, you know, they're not talking about like energy efficiency envelopes, which might be the actual project I'm working on. No, they want to talk about it's not real, you know, or it's real or whatever. And so that's very telling. Like there's so much energy behind it. There's like a spark that goes off right away. Like there's some kind of trigger point there. So, you know, I mean, I've learned a lot from just watching how people engage with the issue. But for me personally, I mean, I've grown, I have kind of two inner lives about this. I spend a lot of time listening to people and their positions, and ones that I totally disagree with, and really trying to hold space and step into where they're coming from and understand what the roots of their experience are. But at the same time, if I'm ever having like a conversation where it's just me, not the researcher, the facilitator, or, you know, the designer or whatever, but me as the person in the dialogue, I find that over time I've become less and less tolerant. And whereas before I was really available to listen, now, especially as I see the impacts of climate change set in and the horrible devastation, you know, that's happening everywhere, and it's gotten really hard for me to also hold the other side. And I tend to now just take my side and speak very candidly about where I'm coming from. And sometimes what I do is I acknowledge, like I was saying before, I think what I've come to learn is that, especially, I think with all polarization that gets so energetic, I think it's really people's identities that are at the root of things. We tend to really think about the issue itself, but the issue wouldn't get so hot unless it was touching on some deeply seated personal stuff. And actually, I'm going to throw in a question, which I like to kind of ask when I teach about this stuff. What do you all think is people's most fundamental human motive? Our need, our deepest need. What do you think is the thing we need absolutely the most? So there's food and water and shelter. So there's really basic survival needs. Let's say those are met. But if those are met, what is the next thing that we absolutely cannot be without? So just kind of take a note for yourself of what you think that is. Mm-hmm. So it's the need to belong. Mm-hmm. It's the need to be part of something. And belonging can take many different forms. It could be just a one-on-one partnership. It could be a family. It could be a community. It could even be something non-specifically like right there in front of you, like an ideology or a bigger idea that you're part of or project. It could be nature. People find ways to feel so integrated into nature. But that need is universal, no matter how people need it. And of course, it's stronger for some people than others. But in one way or another, we're looking for ways to feel bonded, to feel held, to feel that we're part of something and that we're valued by the group that we're part of. And so typically, I think almost all of these big conflicts come down in some way to having that belonging be challenged, and to, or either feeling your own belonging in your group's challenged, or feeling that you are being challenged by another group. That really, I think the conflicts get hot when it's about us and them in some way around these group memberships. And so I tend to try to acknowledge the other side, like where I think I often know where people are coming from. People want to protect this, you know, great country that we've created, a great world, or they love industry and progress. I mean, I am a huge fan of, you know, modern medicine and all the ways in which our lives have become so much safer and better than they had been. I get all of that, and I like to acknowledge it, and then yet speak my position that to hold on to all of that, you know, beauty that we've created, we also need to see our flaws and change and be really honest and really open about what's really going on, and that's the side that I'm on. And I'm on the side of science, and I'm on the side of, you know, authentically responding to the difficult information that's coming my way, rather than finding excuses.
I think that's really, yeah, that's really fascinating. Thank you, Irina. And, you know, just kind of to add to that around the identity and belonging, and, you know, I would call it kind of tribal behavior, you know, like where we are hardwired, you know, as human beings.
Totally.
We are hardwired for connection, for human social engagement and interaction and connection. And our survival, as you asked that beautiful question, our survival absolutely depends on that. And so, you know, if we go back to being cave women, you know, we would have moved together in packs in order to survive. And so for me to then step outside of that group, you know, if I, you know, and not belong is actually an incredible threat. I mean, that's, you know, and that's why we do what we do. We kind of, I don't know, whether it's lack of exposure, or we follow the indoctrinated path that we've grown up with, or, you know, we follow whatever thread of news feed that we want, and we don't want to think outside the box, or whatever it is that happens, but we all follow these tribal kind of groups, if you like, and that gives us our sense of place of belonging and identity. And I think for you, even though this isn't necessarily the topic of today's conversation, I mean, I think both me and you will probably have fascinating conversations to have around our identity, as well as some of the people here today, around our identity and the polarities that happen within that, to that sense of, you know, where do you belong? Where are you welcomed? Where are you accepted? Where are you not accepted? You know, what do I need to do to be accepted? You know, can I speak my truth and be accepted? Or do I have to not, you know, do I have to kind of dumb down or tone police or silence stuff? You know, I think all those things come into polarity. And of course, values and beliefs. But I was really interested in also picking up on something around, you know, when we come across someone who has a view to us that's completely opposite. So you know, part of my work takes me into working with racism a lot in this area that I live in particularly in schools. And you know, often when I work with teachers, they just say, well, we don't have any racism in our school. And I'm like, you do have racism in your school, because I've just been working with a group of 20 kids who are all from different ethnic backgrounds, who are telling me that their experience in school is a really difficult one. And I guess for me, you know, that sense of what polarity brings and polarization brings for me is that sense of entrenchment as well into a particular position. But, you know, I'm also really curious and interested in what the energy is there. You know, to be entrenched in a space means that you have a passion, you have a commitment to something. And for me, you know, I want to be like the magician. I want to be like, you know, okay, so how can we take that energy, you know, which is so badly misplaced as far as I'm concerned in that moment, because I'm so right in that moment of whatever I'm thinking. But, you know, how can I take that energy and help to shift and transform it into some kind of dynamism, some kind of change, you know, and back to that physics about the poles, you know, there's this side and there's this side, but actually how can we make the shifting happen so that there's something happening in the middle space. I'm just looking at the time. So I think we might lead some inner work. Yeah.
Let me just add one thing on to what you said, because it made me think of something that I think is really important. I think a lot of times there's many ways to have disagreements and diversity. And I think the question is, why do some issues become so hot and so polarized, whereas others we can actually keep working? And that's an important question to ask. One, when, you know, confronted with a specific situation, like I do as a facilitator, well, I think one important thing that we don't think about enough is that a lot of times people come in with very difficult personal backgrounds or historical backgrounds, a lot of trauma. And that trauma also gets placed into the space. And so again, we might be talking about a specific issue or situation, but actually there's a whole kind of history playing out that even the individual might not know about. And often, you know, if it is trauma, we don't know about it. But the energy there is very much, it almost like gets projected, like the issue becomes a screen onto which our stuff gets sort of broadcast. And we're playing out that old stuff that we may not even know in the moment, you know, with another person, group, etc. And so I think the noticing of that energy, and like you're saying, and really paying attention to it and discovering what is it actually is, to me, imperative. And that really, I think, is the work of a facilitator, in a lot of ways, of a therapist or psychologist as well, is to find this place where there's some really, what feels like a really nasty contradiction, opposition, conflict, whatever, and to treat it with some curiosity and say, wow, there's a lot of energy here. Something really important is happening here. Yeah, it has this really awful you know, appearance right now, the way it's manifesting, but that energy does need to be released. And from the trauma or from the entanglement that has, you know, somehow come up. But the fact that the conflict is happening is an opportunity. It's a possibility to shift whatever it is that's been sitting there, that's now coming forward, to see it, to recognize it, to get to know it, and to release that energy and take it out of there and return it back to the person, the group, you know, whoever it is, the family, so that they can then use it for their well-being and moving forward, etc. So I think for me, that's I mean, conflict is really hard, but that's kind of the opportunity in it that I continue to believe in. You know, it takes time for that transformation to happen, but I think anytime there's a flare up like that, it is a doorway into, like you're saying, reclaiming that energy and
absolutely.
Yeah, and moving forward.
And the science behind, you know, Dr. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory is really talking about that. He's talking about those kind of what I call the green, amber, red situations, so that when somebody's coming into the space, you know, they may come in from a safe space, which is the green space, if you like, and then, you know, the amber is where they're starting to get triggered, you know, and they're starting to respond in different ways, you know, that are not so safe. But, you know, and then the red is where you're responding absolutely from a place of trauma, where you're not really listening at all. And as you're saying, you know, we get entrenched into that. And I find that kind of, that way of thinking about things really, really helpful. That, you know, anybody that I'm coming into contact and conversation with is actually first just checking out whether this is a safe space for them. You know, we call that neuroception, where you're kind of constantly scanning. We do it all the time, whatever context we're in. You know, we're scanning to see if this is a safe space for me. Can I really speak? And of course, if you come across a view that is potentially challenging or not what you're thinking, then that puts you into the danger, what we would call the danger mode, and you'll go into amber, then you'll go into red, and then you're not listening, and then you're shut down, or you're immobilized, or you're fighting, or whatever's happening. Great, we've so beautifully gone over time. I'm going to have
I know.
do an exercise together. So thank you.
Yes. Okay. So, what we'll do right now in the second part of our time together, we'll talk more about ways to work with polarization. So this is just a little bit of a precursor to that. So, but for now, what I want to do is take a little bit of time to lead you through kind of an inner exploration around your experience of polarization, and then we will go into small groups where you can share your discoveries and just have a little bit of a conversation about it. We're just doing small groups because it's so much nicer to be able to actually talk to each other, because here we are just, you know, a lot of people and you're just listening to us. So if you like to take notes with a pen and paper, maybe grab that, or, you know, on the screen, So we'll just take maybe 5 to 10 minutes, let yourself sit back, and I'll talk you through it. And then the questions will also be in the chat if you want to look back, or if you like to think more visually, read more visually. So think about a polarity that you have experienced. Something that comes up for you pretty quickly. Doesn't have to be very complicated, but something that has energy in it. You feel a little bit of heat around it. It's not a neutral space. Could be an internal polarity, could be something you experience with another person in a work setting, a family setting. Think about what was the issue there. What was the key crux of that polarity? And what were the positions in it?
Irina, you're muted.
Oh, interesting. Thank you for pointing that out. So think about your position in that polarity. And what is it that you would really fight for in that situation? What would you really, really stand for? And feel it in your body. The thing that really makes your energy rise. Catch that thing that you really would be willing to stand for, to protect, to defend. Let yourself really feel the issue itself, but maybe sink in deeper than the issue. What are you really standing for? What's at stake here? Is it a part of yourself? Is it some aspect of reality? Something bigger that you want to protect? Is it a vision? Think about if there's some way in which your values or your beliefs are in need of defense, or is there something about your identity or belonging that's being threatened? What is that deeper reality that you're really standing for, protecting? Really let yourself feel that also in your body. And just take another minute. Really let yourself feel that experience and take some notes about what you discovered. Where are you really coming from? Okay, beautiful. So what we're going to do now is we're going to split up into small groups, and you're going to have about 15 minutes together, and we're going to have about 5 people in each group. And
Irina, sorry, I'm just going to come. We're going to have 10
yeah,
minutes.
please.
10 minutes in this breakout.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
we
cool.
caught up a little bit.
Yeah.
And just have a timekeeper, because you'll have about 5 people, so maybe a couple of minutes for each person to share. So if you could designate a timekeeper, and just share what you discovered in doing this inner work, this reflective exercise, or if you have any, larger observations or any questions. It's an opportunity to have a little bit of a share and a conversation. So you'll get an invite for the group, and then we'll bring you back in about 10 minutes. And then we'll have a couple of minutes just for a general share from your inner work and the small groups. Welcome back. I hope you had a good time together in your small groups, and sorry that they're so brief. I know we always get into things and then just right then it ends. So I want to invite you now to share all together. We have a little bit of time, a few minutes, just to hear each other's experiences and anything you discovered or any questions that may have come up for you that you had struggled with as you were working on this. So feel free to jump in and really anything that's up for you. We'd love to hear, how this went and what it's bringing up.
If you could unmute, then I can spotlight whoever the speaker's going to be. I don't know what's to volunteer first.
Great. Thanks, Corinne. Go ahead.
Anybody?
Go ahead,
I was going to say.
I see Fran also.
Oh,
Fran also.
Shall I go?
Go for it.
Yeah, Fran. Yeah.
Okay, so that was a really interesting inquiry. Thank you for that. And what I got was really, for me, the top card was that there's a real conflict that I'm having with a friend at the moment, which relates to being part of a larger group. We're a kind of peer-led women's group in the spiritual work that I'm doing. And I'm having this conflict with a friend. And it's very painful on both sides. And I think what you were saying about trauma is really key. I can feel, for me, there's a lot of really young wounds that are being activated, and I feel that I can see that in her as well. So it's so hard to conduct the intense feelings of anger and rage, which I can feel are not to do with her. They're from a very much younger place, and I feel that's happening on both sides. But there's certain sticking points which I feel, well, it was just really useful to get that inside there's a feeling in me of something that's happening around this group dynamic and changes that she wants to make that I'm feeling a real no to. And when you asked the question, I can't remember what it was, what would you fight for in this situation? I really got that from the inside, there's a value here of not wanting the group to be manipulated, which feels really, really important to me and feels like I would rather not compromise that. I don't want to compromise that to be part of this group because it feels so important for my integrity and for the group's integrity, for it to be pure and free of manipulation, which is what I feel is going on. So it was really good to get that there's a wider aspect that I'm really passionate about. It's not just my own personal position. It is, and it's not. So it kind of helped me kind of recognize what I was fighting for, and not even fighting, but what was important to me as a value. So I think that question could be applied really usefully to different conflict situations on each side to get what the jewel is in there. So that's just what I wanted to share.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you. Would anyone else like to jump in and share any observations or discoveries that you made?
I'd love
or
to.
things you found difficult? Yeah, please do.
That's funny that that you've all touched on something, and when you said earlier about what is the most deepest need of humans, and you said belong, I immediately felt angry. And I don't feel that it's a threat if I belong. And also that because I get angry at assumptions being made about me, and I always want to go to the opposite. And I want to be different. And I feel that the other words that came up was that to assume is a form of manipulation, and that it crushes my creativity for somebody to go off on their own thing, thinking that they know me and that they've made those assumptions. And they aren't me. It's not authentic, that's the word. And that's what I aim for, I suspect, the authenticity of these two views, these two, just how authentic is their point of view.
Thank you for sharing that. Maybe we have time for one more share if anybody else wants to come in with anything. It could also be something that you found challenging.
I don't mind sharing my experience.
Please do.
I was just saying in our group that I'm writing to Devon and Cornwall Police about an injustice, the racist, their inadequate dealing with a racist incident, and it was a comparison because there's drug issues in my local area, and there's an identical situation going on with my colleagues in Dorset who are working with the police, and we're discussing it, and it's flip side. So I'm complaining to the police to do something and I'm getting aggression from the drug dealers, and then there's my white colleagues who are complaining and they're actually apprehending the people who are doing the dealing. So and I'm being told to be quiet. So I've been writing to the police actually this week and saying, you need to look at this, and this is an example of systemic racism. And I've been keeping my anger away, but it's sort of like, you know, I'm very angry about it. But your questioning helped me to understand that actually the anger was about me not feeling like I belong. Because I grew up in Sri Lanka, which was a colony, and my family were employed by the British colonies. And so I've had a real feeling of belonging to England in many ways. And I moved here later on in my life as a young girl. So I think the anger is that just because of my color, how dare you treat me differently? Because actually I belong as much as you. And there is an injustice that I'm writing about and asking them to see. But I think, it helps me to set the anger aside, and they've been listening, but the anger is bubbling, but I realized what that is. So that it was a really helpful exercise. Thank you. It's great.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry that that's happening. Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you all so much. Yeah, for going with us on this and for sharing with each other and with us. Yeah.
Great. Irina, thank you for leading that so beautifully. And, we are aware that it's a little bite-sized, exploration, and both myself and Irina are offering follow-up workshops after this talk. So, kind of focusing on different things. So, you can come and join us, and we'll have a little bit more time to deep dive a little bit more. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to invite us for a couple of minutes just to shake, because I don't know about you, but, I've been sitting here for like an hour and a half and my ass feels really spread out on this chair. So I'm just going to invite you to get up and just shake out a little bit, whatever that means for you. So just take a minute, just get up from your chair. Invitation is to get up and move and just shake out a little bit, and then come back in a minute's time. Oh, and you can make a noise if you want. That's nice. Great. So the invitation is to come back. Just slowly get yourself sat down again.
That was a good idea.
Yeah, totally. Great. So welcome back. Let those bottoms settle back down again. And I think what we're going to do is we're just going to go into a little conversation again between me and Irina about dialogue and, you know, what is dialogue? What do we and how do we understand dialogue, and what is true? And as Angela, you mentioned the word authentic. What's authentic dialogue? And the curiosity, as Irina began speaking about, around the tension space, you know, what happens in the tension space. So again, I've got a definition. I like definitions. So dialogue is a conversation between two or more people, or it can be to take part in conversation or discussion to resolve a problem. But I see much wider than that. I see dialogue as a space that is a place of creativity and change. And what I'm really interested in is, for example, Fran, you brought up that, if it's okay to refer to, you know, just the kind of the scenario that's happening in this group, you know, is that you'll be here and this other person will be there. And what I'm really interested in is the relational space in between, because there's you in your body space with all your history and your stories and your trauma, and then they will be there with the same, you know, their identity, trauma or no trauma, you know, just their stories of wounding and history. But there is a space in between, and that's the space for me where dialogue, the possibility of dialogue can happen. The space where potentially, you know, we can do this. If we were actually doing this in the physical, you know, if we were all doing this in the meeting space, there's an exercise that we can do where you can actually walk towards each other, and there's a place where you can feel the difference. And like I said, because I'm a shiatsu practitioner, you know, the energy states where, you know, you begin and I begin, and there's a place where that meets. So there's a place where we can energetically resonate with each other without words, non-verbally. And, you know, how do we visit that space? How do we invite that space in? And for me, one of the things around tension spaces is that, you know, and I'm going to speak from the I, you know, I have to remain grounded. You know, when I'm in a space of conflict or polarized conversation, I have to remain grounded. And that's really, really difficult sometimes. So I just did a piece of conflict resolution work in community 2 weeks ago. And it was all around food and cultural appropriation. And I could just see that the person who was an Indian woman of color was trying to speak, to say what this person in this cafe had done was really culturally inappropriate. And she tried in what she would call a soft, loving way, and that wasn't listened to. It was about dal and chapati, by the way, just for the record. You know, this guy, you know, put this thing up saying dal and chapati, and it clearly was not chapati. You know, anyone who knows chapatis know it was not chapati. So he changed it to roti, and it clearly was not a roti either. Okay, it was not a roti, you know, and then I think he just ended up changing it to bread. But what he did in the process, because it all happened on social media, which is not great. It's just not a great space to relate in. It's a difficult place for relationship and dialogue, is that he ended up deleting the messages. So this woman who's had a history, a systemic history, Baruni, as you said, you know, systemic history of not being listened to, was suddenly faced with that trauma again, of being invisible, of not belonging, of not being listened to, not heard, not acknowledged, not valued, all of those things. And so she was really triggered, and she was entrenched in that space, that wounded space, and she could not hear. So, you know, I had to meet him, I had to meet her, and I was really recognizing that no matter what he said, no matter how much he was willing to learn, she could just not go past her position because she was so wounded. So I'm really interested in that place of what can happen, what can shift and change for the wounding. And I just want to make a point here, and I am going to hand over the space to you, Irina, as well in a minute, is that when it comes to conversations around ethnicity and people of color, and other people may relate to this in different ways and different nuances of this, I always have to be the bigger person. So I have to be the one who becomes grounded, you know, and actually part of me is really fed up with that, because in true dialogue, we would have both of us grounded and ready to be at the midline to meet and have this conversation for resolution. But actually, I notice when it comes to conversations about race, ethnicity, social justice, systemic racism, I always have to somehow work harder, dig deeper to be the bigger person, which is really interesting. I'm going to hand over to you for your thoughts because I've taken a while. Yeah, Irina.
No, that's great. Yes, that resonates for sure. Yeah, and I was thinking about, as you were speaking, how thinking back to what we were saying about that loss of connection or seeing the other in this very kind of limited way, that the process of coming to dialogue is really the process of seeing the other as a human again. It's like reestablishing that relationship, where I think in a lot of ways it's easier to just polarize. It's easier to peg the other as something, and I think that there's a real ache in reestablishing connection with someone who you may see as an enemy or as somebody who's really opposed to you, and so it's work, and that's making me, I think, connect to what you're saying also around, you know, diversity situations where it's a ton of work to be in relationship and to really hold your side, the other person's side, and the space between you that allows that safety you were talking about, and the flow of relationship while there's this tension in the space, especially historical one, especially if you're the disadvantaged party. But often it's really, that's who ends up having to do the work in order to continue the relationship, to maintain that that connection. So yeah, these are really important observations. And I just to say that I think on a political level, I think it's easier to pull people away from each other and to throw in you know, accusations and other kind of inflammatory things that disrupt dialogue, and so much harder to foster the spaces where dialogue can actually happen. For some reason, I just thought of an example that I totally hadn't even considered bringing in. I worked in the US Senate at some point, and nowadays people, the senators, who there's 2 from every state in the US, that, you know, they come to Washington, D.C. and they spend their week there working together. Well, it used to be, before airplanes and stuff, that they would all live there in D.C. It wasn't really feasible for them to go back home other than for like the stretch of the summer, and then they'd see their constituents and all of that. And now that's of course changed, and they fly in on Monday and they fly out on Thursday or whatever, and then they spend half time in DC, and so their families are typically back home. Back when they used to live in DC, their kids would go to school together, and so all of these senators from different, and probably representatives as well, from all the different sides and different issues, different states, would have to interact around their children, you know, go to the same grocery store, so they all live in the same neighborhood, right near the Senate, near the Congress, and they had relationships, and they had an interdependence among them that a lot of people think contributed to having a very different internal culture to the political scene. And now that people have become so geographically separated, and of course now more and more politically, you know, issues have become more politicized and more rigidly separated, it's become almost impossible to be in dialogue. There's so few spaces that encourage that, and so many things that work against it. So anyway, just think about what is it that we really need to do to create that space of connection.
Right, thank you. And just thinking again about, because people here might be working in the field of dialogue or conflict resolution, or, you know, obviously we come into it in our personal lives, you know, I think for me it's really important, that word safety, but also like creating a boundary. You know, there has to be some sort of container to the conversation that needs to take place, and people need to drop into that. They need to feel safe in that. We need to feel bonded in that space to then really speak. And for me, it's allowing, again, another nuance for me around dialogue is actually not knowing what is going to arise, you know, not knowing what may be said. And that's really where the dialogue is starting to happen, where the aliveness of the conversation is actually happening. And that all has to happen. Again, it's coming back to, for me, the polyvagal theory about our nervous systems. You know, we have to feel safe. You know, I have to be in the green zone in order to be able to really speak, to find that sense of courage, my authentic, true, strong voice. And, you know, for me, that takes practice. It's taken a lot of practice. And, you know, definitely, as I refer back to that interview I did last Friday that I mentioned earlier, I was thrown, you know, I was off because I was really, really tired, that I was thrown off my middle ground, my center space, to then kind of think, oh, actually, how can I really navigate this space and speak, you know, speak kind of openly, clearly, truthfully, which are some of the qualities that I think are required when you're dialoguing, you know, is that authenticity. Yeah,
absolutely. It makes me think about what actually what a facilitator is somebody who comes in and holds a space around a difficult issue, because without the safety, every time something difficult comes up, it's another reason to pull away and get defensive and get rigid and close up. Again, it's very much in the body. We're going to do an exercise. Sandhya is going to lead an exercise right around that. So maybe to lead into it. Whereas if you can create safety, then there's a little bit of space so that the difficulty becomes an opportunity to ask questions. And like we just did in the exercise, to really figure out where's the other person really coming from. If here we are in some kind of a tension, let's discover each other, oneself first and foremost. Where am I really coming from? But also the other. And we'll try that also a little bit just in a few minutes afterwards, to really explore what does it mean to be able to be fluid and to really open up to what's coming in through conflict. But yeah, that can really only happen if there's a safe space, because without it, we just lock in and hold on tight.
Right. And so we're gonna kind of move into talking about some of the skills. So we're already starting to mention those. So, you know, for me, inquiry, and some of you might be familiar with something called the diamond approach, and there will be references after the talk put alongside this talk. So don't worry about finding them now. And so inquiry for me is a place of complete openness of the human being, you know, and to be completely curious about it. And it's called the Diamond Way, and it was put forward by a Kuwaiti-born US citizen now called A.H. Almas. And it's really an open-ended space for us to just experience our own patterns and ways of behavior. But again, to really try and practice being in the present moment and just to see what arises. And, you know, you can keep, you know, I've been asking myself some of the same questions for years, you know, and still things keep arising. And I think the idea is that we can ask ourselves those questions and keep going deeper and deeper into our exploration, but also, again, looking at things like, you know, where is it that I'm responding from? You know, what is actually responding in me? What is the repetition of response that takes place? And if I stay with the present, is there a place for a new response to take place? So that's one thing. We are going to look at that a little bit more. We're going to do a practice around that actually in the workshop. But for me, being a body psychotherapist, body listening is really, really, really important. So what is actually happening? So right now, as I'm sitting and I'm talking to you, I'm also feeling like there's a little bit of constriction in my throat because, you know, I'm in a public space. I can feel just below my solar plexus, a little bit of tension. My knee is slightly achy because I have a right achy knee. I'm feeling the softness of my hair on my cheeks. All of that is kind of happening. My digestion, like it's kind of coming up to dinner time. All of that is happening as I'm here speaking with you. So what is the somatic experience that's the experience taking place in our body? How can we fine tune and practice our body listening skills to inform us? So the polyvagal theory really talks about that, to inform us, to know that, oh, hang on, somebody's just said something, and I can see that I'm going into that amber zone where I'm not going to be responding from an open-hearted, truly deep listening space. So what we're going to do, I think, is we're just going to have a little practice of that together, I think. So what I'm going to do is just initially, Corinne, I wonder if we could go to gallery right now. That would be great. So just have everybody in gallery view. So I'm going to do that too. Fabulous. God, look at you all. You're so beautiful. Amazing. So what I'm going to do is just invite you initially just to close your eyes. So I often talk about, earlier on I mentioned the inner landscape. So that's who we are internally in our own processes and our curiosity around that. So we're just going to stay and explore that for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to come out and what I call come into the outer landscape for a couple of minutes. So just closing, inviting everybody just to close your eyes wherever you are. And it is an invitation. If you're not happy to do that, that's absolutely fine. And just really noticing the shape of your body right now. So whatever that is, they're not changing, not judging, not correcting, just, oh, this is how I've landed right now. This is the shape that my body has made right now as I'm sitting here in front of this screen. So just noticing that. And then for each one of us, this answers to this, responses to this will be different. Just listening to what is happening inside my body. So wherever that takes you. And it could be to the strongest place of sensation or the weakest place of sensation. And give yourself permission to move around in that. And then just for a moment, maybe around 30, 40 seconds, which is more than a moment, take your attention to what we call the solar plexus. So kind of above the belly button, if you take that space above the belly button, below the ribs, that whole area, just taking your attention there. And again, just noticing what's going on here. So again, being playful like children, being curious, finding out. And then noticing your breath. Just how am I breathing right now? Beautiful. And then what I'm going to do is slowly, very slowly, just still carrying this awareness of yourself, just to invite you to open your eyes. And we're going to just take a minute and just look around the screen and just have a look at each other. So just connecting from this inner landscape, still holding this awareness of yourself, but then also just connecting with each other. So yeah, stay as long as you want on one person or move around. Right. So if we do that for 4 minutes, apparently we break down our barriers. It's been proven time and time again. If we just sit and look at each other for 4 or 5 minutes, we will go through a lot of our layering and a lot of our defenses. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to read a couple of things, and I want you to just notice what comes up as you hear. So simply a listening exercise, and just see what comes up in terms of your body and responding, and try and see if you can stay with the body. So these are some quotes from Nick Griffin, who was a former chairman of the British National Party. So basically he doesn't like people like me. Let's put it straight. He doesn't like people like me. So this is one of the things that he said. So notice what happens when you're listening. Same-sex marriage isn't about the rights of gay people. It's fundamentally an attack by a leftist and capitalist elite which wants the pink pound and the pink dollar. It's an attack on marriage. It's an attack on tradition. It's an attack on the fabric of our society. Teach them about homosexuality. That's not in any way for the rights of homosexuals. That's some dirty pervert trying to mess with the minds of my kids. And I think it's great that a major European power has stood up and said, leave our kids alone. So just letting yourself notice what happens when you listen to that. Beautiful. So I'm going to give you another one from the same guy. Western values, freedom of speech, democracy, and rights for women are incompatible with Islam, which is a cancer, eating away at our freedoms and our democracy and rights for our women, and something needs to be done about it. So again, noticing the body. What might you say? What might you do? How might you move if somebody was truly opposite you in the physical saying those things? And of course, when we're starting to explore the space, what I call the middle space in a polarity where we can ground ourselves to respond, what happens is then we can think about a choice of responding differently to how we always have responded. So one more from him. As for racism, the modern British National Party opposes mass migration and multiculturalism on the grounds that human biocultural diversity is being exterminated by global capitalism. In Britain, and indeed the entire West today, we are partway through a process artificially imposed by a dogmatic liberal ruling class that is steadily destroying the very possibility of preserving our racial and cultural differences and the unique nations to which they have given rise. I want to help stop the immigration, which is destroying this and every other white nation in the world. Then I want to see that deadly tide turned. So again, noticing. I'm going to give you one more. I'm going to give you two more. So again, notice how your body feels. We all should know that diversity makes a rich tapestry. And we must understand that all the threads of the tapestry are equal in value, no matter what their color. So that's Maya Angelou. So again, noticing what happens in your nervous system, in your body, responding. So one more, one of my favorite authors, Arundhati Roy, and many of you will know this quote. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. So again, notice what happens in your system. And if somebody was opposite you, sharing that in the physical, I mean, I am in a sort of physical way, you know, what happens? How would you respond? Would it be different to one of the Nick Griffin quotes? So maybe, can I just maybe take two responses? Just do two people want to respond to maybe the first quote and then somebody responds to the second two quotes? So the Nick Griffin quotes about gay marriages, Islam being a cancer, or racism and immigration. Could just somebody want to tell me how that was, listening with their body? Abid, yeah, go for it.
I just realized I got really fidgety.
Okay.
Contrast from being aware of my belly and stuff to just quite calm to, and yeah, I was just moving.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Great. And anyone else want to share around the Nick Griffin, just responses from the body listening perspective?
Sandhya, I'd like to just say that when you read those, I almost felt a surge of nausea and just kind of a pure hot rage that I think I wouldn't even call it contraction. It was just fiery rage that, and kind of, I just wanted it to stop, you know.
Yeah. Great, Annie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Great. And just somebody responding to the last two quotes from Maya Angelou and Arundhati Roy. Just how was that, listening to those quotes?
I think I felt such a sense of hope. I think hope and joy. And I'm so glad you finished it with those quotes. So thank you.
Thank you. So it sounds like people were noticing that shift in the body depending on the words, depending on the meaning of the words. Beautiful. Thank you all for taking part in that. We are going to explore more of this. We're going to dive a bit deeper in the workshop that we do. But I'm going to hand over to Irina because we're kind of shuffling out of time, aren't we? Irina, do you want to take over from me and talk about suggesting?
Sure.
Yeah.
We don't have a whole lot of time left.
Yes.
But yes, we're definitely going to explore this in more depth. It's an amazing thing when we start working on these things. They take a long time. There's so much here to go into, you know, it's a timeless kind of process. I'm sitting with a lot of feelings from that. It's like, and I almost feel like I've tuned out the political process here just because I can't stay in that body space all the time. And yeah, all that goes with that. But maybe to say, I don't know if we'll have a chance to practice, but just introduce some other tools that we have for working with conflict. So we've just been working on really being attuned to yourself and what's going on in your emotions in your body. The other layer of working on conflict is to explore the disturber, the other, the one that really troubles you. And I think the key thing is that the other is not really outside of us. And if we ever manage to get into a really intense conflict with someone, it's because in some way there's something about them that evokes something in us, or in fact, it may just be our stuff that we're seeing in them, and it's our stuff that we don't like, or we don't know very well, or it's not welcome, or it's been made taboo by our socialization, or our prior experiences, or our, religious, social, cultural, political beliefs, or whatever it is. And so when we encounter it outside of ourselves, we really have a very hard time with it, because actually we have a hard time with it in some form in ourselves. And sometimes it's actually really good stuff that we carry, but because we've come to fear it and feel that it's foreign, we have a really difficult relationship with it. And encountering it in the other is an actual opportunity to get to know it and welcome it back into ourselves, and really explore how it can be an integral part, and what, how we can draw on it to support our well-being. So some of what we do is, we'll have to do this in the follow-up workshop, because that takes a little bit of time. It's a deep practice, and it's one that really requires a lot of courage and creativity and curiosity. But what we do is we explore the other, what we really don't like about them. We really go for the thing that's the most aversive. And then we let go of the actual context in which it's happening and try to get down to the energy of it, and really get to that deepest level at which we can experience it. And then we try to see how we try it on. We put it on. We really find it in our bodies, kind of like what we were doing now. We'll find it in our lives, and then we start to interact with it, and we develop a relationship with it. So I was talking before about dialogue as really creating a relationship across a divide. In a way, this is the deepest form of building relationship with the other, is to really try it on in ourselves. It's an art form to learn how to do that. But I have to say that for me personally, it's really the most powerful tool that I have. And even in our practical lives, preparing for any sort of a difficult interaction, or being in some kind of a space that we find very challenging, the absolutely best way to prepare for it is to go into that thing that really troubles us the most, and try it on and step into it and discover it in ourselves, and typically discover it in a really good way, actually. And I can give you some examples. We're so short of time. Yeah, I don't think we'll get to practice. So let me just give you an example of something. I think most often what we do is encounter our power in the other. So I tend to be very fluid with time, for example, and I've been in many situations where I may I'll give you an example with my partner, who gets really annoyed that I don't stick to, I don't do things in the time allotted. So if I think about that other side, I'm just doing this in the moment. I don't know if this is the best example, but I imagine something that's very rigid. Like if I really look at the worst of it, that says, you have to do things exactly this way. And then my side says, well, but I just want to flow and be open and free and follow myself and, be my true self. And the other side says, but then you won't get anything done. You absolutely have to do it within these boundaries. And so that's really a polarity. That's real opposition there. Well, if I were to really work on it, and I were to go into that experience, something that says, like this, it has to be done like this. And if I start working on it in my body, and if I really inhabit it, if I drop the context and my annoyance with it and who it came from, but I really get to what is that thing, I'm going to give myself a moment to do that. What I start to feel like is like this deep kind of like directness and a sort of clarity. This is who I am. This is what I really stand for. I believe in this. I really want to go for this thing. This is the energy when I feel it in myself. So I picked it up from the other, but now that I feel it, and I need a lot more of this energy. I'm a person who can really like be super shy about going forward with what I want. So this is something I need. And if I really work on it, I can find ways to remember this when I get into situations, when I start to want to back off and not put myself forward, and really could become my ally, something that stands by me when I really need to keep going with whatever my purpose is, and to really stand by myself, stand by, you know, what I'm doing. And then if I continue to practice this over time, I may become better and better at it as I go. So just a very kind of brief example of how that kind of thing could be done. And then just one other thing I'll talk about, and sorry we don't have a chance to try it out, but you know, come to the workshop. I think it'll be in 2 weeks, is to a question of listening. How do we really listen to the other? So we talked about authentic communication, holding a safe space, all imperative. But the deepest way of listening to the other is also stepping into them. Because as long as you're listening from the outside, you're still filtering it through all of your expectations and beliefs and what you think about them, right? You're not really getting to the root of it. But to really listen is to do a kind of role switch where you give yourself a chance to really feel your own side, but then you allow yourself to fully go into the other and really experience them and speak from them. It doesn't mean that you agree with them. It doesn't mean that you will become them. But in a way, what you're allowing yourself to do is to really hear where they're coming from. I mean, it's still you, of course, but you'd be surprised by how much you discover when you let yourself really shift into that other perspective. So it's something that I highly encourage you to try when you are in a polarity. Let yourself be fluid. And it's a very, it's also really an art form because conflict makes us rigid. You felt it in your body just now, listening to that. I mean, everything tenses up. So hopefully you're not dealing with such a rough conflict, but allow yourself that spaciousness and some fluidity to go to the other side and then come back and see how it transforms your view of the conflict. So these are just a couple of tools. I know we have so few minutes left. I'm going to hand it back over to Nessie, but hopefully this has inspired you to, you know, explore this and try some of this out.
Thank you so much, Sandhya and Irina. I think you have just touched the tip of the iceberg of how incredibly complex and deep this work is. So for those of you who would like to know more and you'd like to go deeper into this, we're really excited that we will be holding 2 workshops. So Irina will be leading one and Sandhya the other. Irina's will explore how conflict and polarization can be doorways into growth and connection. And Sandhya's will look at deep listening and the polarities within the body, which will be a much deeper inquiry into what you've heard today. So thank you so much to our wonderful speakers, and thank you to all of you for bringing yourselves, your openness, your listening, your sharing. Everything will be this will be shared, the recording, and we'll also be offering resources with links and more information on a lot of what's been discussed today and more. So that will be included in a follow-up email with the recording and with some follow-up resources. The Global Environments Network, we are a charity, we are a non-profit, and we rely on donations. So if you have felt moved and inspired by today, and if you have the financial means, please do share some donations. Every little helps and it's massively appreciated. If you'd like to find out more, if you'd like to get involved with GEN, get in touch with me or Corinne, sign up to our newsletter, stay in touch. Sandhya, you've asked what are the dates of the workshop. We'll be sending all of that around in an email. One of them is early December and one's in, I think, the 17th of November, yours, Irina. But we will share everything in a follow-up email. So thank you so much to everyone. Oh, there's lots of chats coming in, the people asking me questions. Oh, great. Corinne, thank you. You have put up the workshops in there. So yeah, blessings to you all in whichever part of the world you are in. And thank you so much to everyone. Keep communicating, stay open, and stay in touch. Irina and Sandhya, is there anything you want to finish off on, or Corinne?
No, I think just thank you, Jen, for inviting us. This is such a rich topic. It's such a relevant topic right now. And, yeah, we could do a series of talks on these, can we, where people really, because it would be really lovely to hear from people, their experiences of being in conflict and polarized spaces. So, yeah, this is just touching the iceberg. But thank you for inviting us. It's been really rich, to be here. So thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Oh.
Well, it was a pleasure to do it with you, Irina, as well.
I know. This was really fun. It was wonderful to get to know you. Yeah. And I want to thank you, Nessie, again for dreaming this up and for bringing us together and for creating community around this. And just to say again, is a wonderful community and of folks from all over the world doing really diverse work around land rights and environmental protection and learning and teaching and so many wonderful things. And I was a participant in one of the programs 2 years ago that was really such a nourishing and deep and really enlightening experience. And so just thank you and thanks everyone for being curious and working on yourselves and trying to better our world and being together.
Take care, everyone.